Right. So, take a couple of slow, gentle breaths and just running through the checklist, weight slightly forwards, soften your knees and just allowing your hips to drop back, pelvis to hang. Turning quite gently, quite small movements from your hips and your waist. Really the movement at the moment in the upper part of your body very even all the way through, so your shoulders not moving that much, but with the combination of your weight sinking and that stronger feeling developing and just the blood beginning to flow and your body to warm up generally, you'll find after a while that the momentum will carry your shoulders just a little bit further. And you can allow that to happen as long as it doesn't create a tightening anywhere in the sides or the spine or anything. Your arms quite heavy. In other words, just see if you can feel the weight of your arms hanging down. Spread your fingers out a little bit. Remember with this exercise, there's really two approaches you could take so far as your head is concerned. Your head sits on your shoulders, the chin pulled in and so on. You could either look straight ahead and let your body turn underneath your head, in which case just be careful, because when you do this, it's essentially like turning your head. So just be careful you're not straining or putting pressure on the side of your neck. Or you could do this. And the problem with this is, especially if you're in a small space, is that if your eyes are open, you get this kind of blur in front of your eyes. If you can somehow just focus into the mid-distance, then you could try that as well, or just close your eyes. Try both ways and see which works better for you. I suspect in the end what happens for me is a combination of those, that I will turn, and then at a given point my head won't continue to turn. I don't really want to look over there. I want to keep a sense of looking forwards. And then at least that's what I'm doing at the moment. I have to think about that, because obviously at the moment I'm teaching, I'm watching the screen. If I'm in a class, I'm watching people. I'll see what I do with my head when I'm training on my own and haven't got to look in any particular direction. I'll let you know. All around the shoulder, neck, quite a smooth movement. It's almost like if I was going to do this and just let my arm hang like this, because I'm not trying to lift my arm at all. It's just this. So if you did this with one hand, you should feel the big muscles here moving, extending and contracting there, movements in the muscles of your arms and so on. Likewise, down to your sides and your back, in particular, really all through the upper body, but particularly in the back, there's some big muscles here in the back. They always, when I pay attention to them, the muscles they're massive kind of rope-like muscles, and we really don't want them to be stiff, to be tight. Remember this idea that all the way through the body, all the way through body and mind, we're looking for a sense that there is a bit of space for us. We've just sort of sat back a little bit, and I've used various images for that. Talked about the mountain when we do Embrace Tiger, return to the mountain, still as a mountain. But also this idea of coming into the clearing in the forest is something that I've talked about as well. So whichever image kind of works for you, just looking for this feeling of settling, and with that a kind of opening up. It's almost like the feeling you get if you've been wearing a pair of shoes that are just a bit tight, or a new pair of shoes. When you take them off, it feels as though your feet can kind of expand slightly, and it's a similar sort of quality. Then raising your arms. And that opening up, I think, is a really valuable thing for us, both in mind and body, particularly, you know, grey, dull mornings like the one that we've had here in Cambridge. I don't know what it's like where you are, but and it's midwinter and the days are shorter and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's nice to feel that without straining and without forcing anything, without falsifying anything, we're able to get that sense of opening and expansion. Then just let your hands drop down. Rolling your weight forwards and backwards a little. Feeling the movement in the soles of your feet, the arch of your foot in particular, up into your calves, thighs. And then again, make sure you're not holding tight around your hips, your lower back. You feel the movement there and up through your back. And then go side to side. It's only quite a small movement, but it's fine if you feel, you can say I'm angling slightly. It's not quite like the side to side weight transfer that we do where we're trying to keep upright. It's just this kind of swaying quality. Obviously you don't want to go out too far. And then combining the two, so going around, kind of tracing the outline of the step. So you're over on one side, the edge of the foot, you go forwards towards the toes, you go across towards the other toes or the ball of the foot, down the opposite edge to the heel and back, and so on and so forth. Soften your knees. That should happen. You want to explore the boundaries of this movement and work out or observe what's going on in the body as you do this. My sense is that very much the middle part of your body, hips, pelvis, pelvic floor, lower back, are actually quite active in keeping us stable while we're doing a movement like this. So this is a good exercise for those parts of the body and other aspects, of course. But we begin to get a sense of movement very much in this area. Between hips and waist is the area often referred to as the lower dantian, and it's seen as being a kind of energy center in Chinese energetics. One translation of the name is actually sea of energy, and it's almost like you've got some water in the glass and you're kind of swirling it around. So energy, movement, however you can to think about it. And this is a good exercise for giving you that sort of sense. Once you've established how far you can move and you're comfortable with that, and then going back the other way. And this time, just turn it into a spiral so the circle gets smaller and smaller. So you just arrive at this central point, not necessarily the physical midpoint, but a sense of where your weight is centered and settling. And just, that's really where this, this resting, this space, this quietness, this stillness, and so on. This is where we come back to remind ourselves how that can feel. And then letting your hips drop back and pushing up. So part of the idea is to reintroduce the movement without actually losing that sense of space, which I know sounds contradictory, but there's quite a lot in Tai Chi that does until you work with this a little bit. Maintain the possibility of movement through the space. You need the space for the movement, I suppose. In all of the movements, you will find that there's a moment where you seem to come back to that point. We move through that central point in one way or another. Maybe not exactly physically, although with some that we do. But for instance, with this one, it tends to be here, just as you settle, you turn the hands, and then you push up. It's just a moment. It's not a loss of momentum. Just a sort of quietening of that momentum, a preparation for the upward movement, the loading, if you like, things like that. And then change to the wild goose. So somebody said, today's the winter solstice, and this time of year, in theory, not in practice, is a quietening, a settling down. It's sort of like traditionally a time where a lot of us don't do very much, and so on and so forth. And it's almost like that still point of the year. So these ideas, these rhythms, and these observations aren't confined to just our own bodies. Change to part in the clouds. And in Chinese medicine, these things are very much taken into account: climate, time of year, lifestyle, and so on and so forth. All seen as being things that influence our well-being, need to be accounted for in any kind of well-being practice. There's also a sense that those are the points, those sort of moments of being centered, still, or whatever, are the points where we can change more effectively. So, for instance, here we go back to rooting down, do 3 in a row, and push up from that point and come back to it. As you settle in there, your hands just come out to your sides, and that takes you into the wild goose. And then part in the clouds. When you do the rooting down, the first one, really pay attention to that middle part of your body, the one I just described as labeled as the lower Dan chin. And then next time you do the wild goose, you build on that. So this one you expand and contract here, and then as you start to do the wild goose, you expand it. And then in this area, the solar plexus, lower part of the rib cage, the lower dantian, and then of course you build up lower, middle, and the upper dantian, so upper part of the chest, head, shoulders, and then back down again. Don't get too caught up on exactly where those areas are. I'm just really drawing your attention to broad areas. There are sometimes when some practices where you might want to be much more precise, but it's really your awareness of these different areas of the body and how they interrelate that I want you to get a feel for, rather than get into a debate about, well, this or this, the lower dantian. It can vary, to be honest. So, but each of them has a particular feel to it, I think. Going back to the turning that I referred to in the opening exercise, this time when you do the first exercise, rooting down, turning the hips and feel the upper part of your body following that very precisely. So shoulders are still very much physically in line with the hips. Start the same way as you go into the wild goose, but then turn a little bit further in that area of the solar plexus, the middle dantian, and then lower middle, and then finally, let's say your shoulders moving a little bit further. And just be aware that going the other direction, be aware of the area between those areas, and make sure that as you turn in each area, you're not creating a stiffening, a tightening. And you shouldn't need to, because the accumulation of the movement, the accumulation of the turn should mean that you'll get plenty of movement through your shoulders and your arms, but without the strain. And really we want to try and do this with all the movements that involve some kind of turning. So one of the things that we want to be very aware of as we do this is the difference, say, in a muscle, and it's probably easier to think of certain muscles in the first instance. The difference between a muscle that's extended and even a muscle that's under load, and a muscle that's gone beyond its limit. You've gone too far, you're asking to do too much. Because that's when it will start to tighten and you will get less movement. And again, another image I've used with people in the past is, to think of your body like a musical instrument, and if a muscle tightens, it's like that string is out of tune, and that, as I said, will block the movement, the vibration through your body. Just do one more on each side, one more round on each side. Now we want to feel that build-up of movement from low in the body to higher in the body as we change to dragon plucks the star from the sky, from all of the movements. the expansion from the lower part of your body, feet, legs, hips and belly, through and upwards. Again, we can think of that in various ways. Think of it as a push from the ground, as an expansion in the belly, the lower dantian, like a ball expanding and pushing in all directions. But as always, the images are there to help us understand and to observe, to move with what's actually happening within the body. No one image is complete in itself. So, which you choose to use at any particular time really depends on what exercise you're doing, what suits you, what works for you. One more time on each side. And then changing to pushing in 4 directions. Come around. And then change. Remember, your hand should be slightly in front of your body, so when I come to here, all I've got to do is turn my hand palm down and it slides down just in front of my nose. And then when I turn, once again, it's the body doing the turning. So I turn in the lower dantian, the middle dantian, and the upper dantian. And that may bring my hand over a little bit more to the other side. Because remember, if you're doing this turn in this way and you're doing it correctly, you will get a little bit more movement in your shoulders and hence in your arm. But what you don't want to do is to get here and kind of pull this arm across. It should still feel comfortable across the shoulder there. Strong, and change the other side, but it shouldn't feel like you're somehow pulling your shoulder out of line. So we want to be constantly refining these exercises. Constantly bringing our attention into our body and noticing, observing, and eventually working with what is actually going on there. And adding the turn if it's comfortable. You shouldn't feel unstable if you do the turn. If you are, I would suggest don't do it here, but to work on that 3 stages of the turning, because if you're not doing that, then something like this could happen. You start to turn, and I'm losing the root, and I'm falling over. So it's very interesting to look at the turn in that way. Very useful. And then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Once again, we feel the movement building very strongly in this one, from feet, hips. It's very clear that the sinking of your weight and the dropping back and down of your hips are the things that make coming up with this spacious quality in our body possible. One more time. Good. And stand. Just take a closer look at our breathing. I tend to do this more in the seated classes than the standing classes, because I think it's probably better to do this in the first instance, sitting down. So feel free to sit if you want to, but I'll show it to you standing. And it makes use of this awareness of these 3 parts of the body, in particular the lower and the middle dantian. I talked before about this idea of bellows breathing. This is an exercise which ideally you'll have some support for your back. So I'll show it to you just so you can see what's going on, and leave you to practice it either laying on your back, say your knees up, or sitting back in the chair. But first of all, I'm going to place my hands here, just on the belly, and what I'm looking for is to just feel a slight movement as I breathe in and out. And as I breathe in, my hands get pushed away. Now you have to be very careful with this. Don't force it. But if you don't feel that, especially if you're in the chair or laying down, then actually just do it 2 or 3 times to start off with, because you're using those muscles there quite differently. If you're laying down, you could put a book there, for instance. That can help. So not too heavy, but just to feel the rise and fall. The next stage is the same, but it's done here, just below the solar plexus in the middle dantian, and normally you feel a bit more of the movement there. So it's the same thing. As you breathe in, your hands get pushed away. As you breathe out, they drop down. As I say, you really want, ideally you have your back supported. If you're really good at the Tai Chi posture, it'll be your roots and your legs that are supporting your back, so you won't need the chair. But to start off with, again, use the chair. The next stage, you could go up to here, by the way, but normally, I mean, we feel that anyway. So it's these 2 sections of the body that we want to focus on. You put one hand back in the original position, and then put one hand on the solar plexus. And what you will look to feel is that the lower hand moves slightly before the upper hand. These are not big movements, by the way. So So what you get then is that expansion, belly, solar plexus, first in the belly, then in the solar plexus, then in the chest and the ribs, and that bellows-like action. Once again, the movement, the action in the body, initiating not from up here, but from the center and the lower part of the body. So in the chair, I would just to show you very quickly, I would sit back like this, and this would give me the support, and you can maybe see my hand moving a little bit there. I'm working quite hard for that, and then here you can see that, and then what you'd get is lower and upper. So that starts to train your body in the basic breathing. Don't do too many to start off with. And another reason for doing it in a chair to start off with is sometimes you get a bit lightheaded doing it. It's like, oh, you're kind of over breathing in a way. But gradually, we feel, because the movement physically, the expansion, the push, whatever, comes from down here, from the legs, or we think of the expansion in the belly here. There's an obvious correlation, I think, there for us as we begin to get more used to it. But in the first instance, really try the breathing separately and get used to that. Otherwise, you'll just lose something from the movement. So I'll perhaps remind you about that as we go through some of the later exercises. But for now, go back to this movement, pushing up and sinking down, and go back into the wild goose. So if kind of like that, fast forwards a few years and you practiced all of this, what you would look to be happening is just that your breathing is automatically correlating with your movement and your posture, and vice versa. And so just they're all one thing. You may be aware of it every now and then, but you don't have to stay thinking about it all the time. And then once again, turning, belly, solar plexus, shoulders, and turn back to the front. This time letting your hands hang all the way down and push up and down. I normally try and do it in the parallel stance with my weight 50% in each leg. Remember, hand will always be slightly in front of your shoulders, never pulled behind. So it's the movement in your body, and in particular those three areas of lower, middle, and upper dantian that define the range of the movement. One more on each side. And from here, change to the movement circling arms. Let your rear elbow drop down. Circling arms. From the side, you watch my hand, my elbow drops, my wrist drops as I push forwards. Here, with the withdrawing hand, it's as though my elbow is sort of attached to my hip. So my hip is here. When there's movement here, so obviously, can you see what I'm doing now? Obviously, it's throwing a lot of my posture out, but can you see how it's pulling my elbow back? So we become aware of these very subtle connections. It's like there's lots of very thin guy ropes, almost like spiders' webs, quite elastic, attaching many different parts of your body. And any one movement is likely to engage one or more, often a lot more of those attachments, those connections. One more time. One part of the body that can make those connections is called the fascia. Fascia is a layer, almost like a second skin, I suppose you'd call it. It's a layer between the skin and most of the internal organs. It used to be just thought to be completely inert. It's not. We now know that it has some elastic qualities. So if I extend out like this, then part of what I'm doing is extending the fascia, and it's like an elastic band. It will contract. It also seems to have what I described as some crystalline qualities, and it has sort of like an effect on bioelectrics in the body and so on and so forth. This is stretching my knowledge of modern physiology, but you know, as kind of microconductors and so on and so forth. So it's not as in as we used to think, and it's led some people to propose that the meridian system in Chinese medicine exists within the folds and the shapes of the fascia, because it's all folded over in lots of ways. Whether it is or isn't, I've got no idea. But it's obviously significant for the body, and it's important to try and engage these very subtle elements. Otherwise, it all comes down to muscle. And so we want to try and relax muscles as much as possible, so it's not that they're not being used, but so that they're not doing all of the movement. We don't want, for instance, this last exercise, we want it to be this. See how the body's turning. I can do an extension all the way through it, not just this, because now it's the arms and the biceps and the triceps and so on and so forth that are doing all the movement. Have one foot forwards. There are some interesting responses that our body will make if somehow you can get to work with the fascia. There's a modern therapy called Bowen technique that can be very effective. It works almost exclusively with the fascia, as do some aspects of the between our Chinese massage and acupressure that I do. There seem to be areas in the body that often have quite an effect on quite remote areas of the body. And we can perhaps begin to feel how that can begin to work, because a simple movement like this, you think of that lower dantian being compressed and then expanding like a ball, and it has an effect on the shoulder, the head, and so on. So in other words, it moves your body. So this view of ourselves as one unit We're not making different movements, we're making one movement. Gradually builds. And then raising your toes and your heel. So there's that pausing. And that sense of our body working as one unit actually has a very calming effect on the mind. And so really contributes to this sense of stillness, space. And then stepping in. Shake it. On the other side. So with all these ideas, it always seems to me as though we can look at them in different ways and still benefit from them. If you're interested in this idea of the flow of energy through the body, then it kind of you can work with it in that way. I remember a friend of mine saying, he was talking about the Zubo, the points, the acupoints in the body that we sometimes are aware of when we're moving. And he said, if you're not interested in that, if it doesn't work for you, just think of them as being points on a map, landmarks on a map. Either way, what you're doing is bringing your attention in very closely. So whether you think of the fascia as the conduit for the meridian system, or whether you just see it as, you know, as it demonstrably is, this layering running through the body that has some role perhaps in movement, or that we can offer a role in movement to because of its elasticity. Either way, you're still changing how you're doing the movement, developing the movement. And then just raising your toes and your heel. And then stepping in. And then take a couple of steps forwards. And back. Or the other way around. And then one of my main teachers has quite a useful trick. Well, it's useful for him. It's not so great for me. When we're pushing hands, if he can get his hand about there, if he can push in and the first time I noticed it, I was thinking, what is he doing? What's he up to? And suddenly my back leg collapsed, and it was almost like, you know, he pulled a string here, and my knee went forwards, or some that was very interesting. Bit annoying, but it was very interesting. There are these odd connections through the body that go beyond just simply, you know, the kind of obvious connections that we can map of bone, nervous system, muscles, and so on and so forth. And it's likely that the fascia is really quite quite involved with that. I think there may be more to find out. Now, sink back, place your hands on your belly, push forward. Pigeon spreads its wings. Notice where the hands start and where they finish. So we could say that from the weight in the back, the hands start on the lower dantian, then move up through the middle dantian and arrive at the upper dantian. And it's interesting that people have commented more than once to me that they find this a very useful exercise for the breathing. And it feels almost natural to begin to breathe in as you go forwards and breathe out as you go back. So if you're looking to work with the breathing, practice those little exercises that I showed you earlier. And then maybe use something like pigeon spreads its wings to just play around with the integration of breathing and exercise. Take a step forwards and try that on the other side. Always be aware that your posture is vital for your breathing. And I always think it's quite interesting if you see on television or you watch an athletics meeting, you see these very, very fit people pounding round the track. And when they get to the end, almost always what they'll do is something like this. Or they'll even lay down on their back. I saw from one guy, he just run something like the 10,000 meters, and he was more or less doing this exercise on his back. He was laying on his back, he had his knees up, he had his hands on his belly. These are positions where we can take deeper breaths with less strain. And this is one of the big challenges, I think, in the Tai Chi posture, to lose a habit of straining and pulling in the belly, pulling the body in when we go to stand up. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we don't use the muscles here in our overall posture, but if you pull them in, you're actually putting pressure on your breathing. So, once again, mostly what we've evolved for is being horizontal, and that's why if you're out of breath or somebody's having an asthma attack, you take them to a near horizontal position, because it means that there's space then for the lungs to drop down into, to expand down into, for that bellows type action. And that makes scooping the sea, not scooping the sea, but rowing a boat in the middle of the lake here one of the most important exercises, because it's here that we come up without having to pull in like that. And you see, as soon as I pull in, you see how my chest puffs out, because it's like it's pushing up on the lungs. It's this that I want. That's my excuse for having a big belly, anyway. So be aware of that. That anything I say about breathing has to be balanced against how you're doing with your posture, and it goes against a lot of what we've been told. So again, you need that awareness, you need that space, you need to sit back from your habits and conditioning to be able to make this work. Now, sit back again here, and this time again with the arms out slightly. This could be with an in-breath, I beg your pardon, and you breathe out as you go forwards. It's not just about how you're breathing. One thing you may notice if you're thinking about your breath is just the freshness, the sharpness of the in-breath. There's a rejuvenating quality to it, one that we can almost visualize spreading through the rest of the body. And then fisherman cast the net. So all these elements are possible to work with within all of the exercises. And one of the reasons why we build up a set of exercises is so that we can get past the now what you're doing with his arms stage, as I think of it, and actually begin to notice what's going on within the body. So these exercises, from the simplest to the most complicated, are constantly developing, constantly changing, for all sorts of reasons. One more time. And then pushing a wave, pushing the boat. Good. Now change over. And same thing on the other side. And then changing. And change. One more time. Good. Rub your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. And your arm. And the other side. your back. Around your hips. And your legs. Light on your belly. Yeah. So as I said, this is often time of year in this part of the world anyway, in our culture, our dominant culture, where it stops. It's also a time of year though where people can get very busy in all sorts of ways. Obviously it's going to be different at the moment, but still there's that possibility to take that time and to settle, to rest, to find that sense of stillness, because it's also what is happening on the planet around us at the moment. Again, in our part of the world, it's that midwinter quality, isn't it? And it's just sort of slowing down. The growth period hasn't really properly started yet, even with climate change. So your Tai Chi practice should, in a way, reflect that and complement those sort of qualities. So remember to practice. So there's 2 more classes actually this week. One seated tomorrow, one standing on Wednesday. You're very welcome to those. If you don't make it, have a lovely break. Do take some time out to just be with yourself, to be in that space when you get a chance, especially if you are able to meet up with family and so on and so forth. And we'll be starting up again in the new year, so the first week of the new year. And as always, I will do a man out at some point. But for now, just thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance and support. And I think both Farah and I have been very aware of how fortunate we've been with people coming to our classes, and your loyalty to the classes and the efforts that you've made. We're very grateful for that. It's kept us in touch with what we do, and hopefully it's been the same for you. So we're quite looking forward to a little break. So, but we'll be back refreshed in the new year. So now, embrace tiger, return to mountain. And stand. So thank you again, everybody. Have a lovely Christmas.
Thank you, Mike.